She was handcuffed, humiliated, and dragged to court just for buying a tablet. But what the officers didn't know? She was an undercover FBI agent. And when the truth came out, everything exploded. What happened next will shock you. It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon. Dr. Nia Jackson, a well-dressed black woman in her mid-30s, walked out of an electronics store in downtown Atlanta, holding a receipt and a brand new tablet. The sun was out, the streets were alive, and she had just picked up a gift for her niece's birthday, a simple gesture of love on an otherwise ordinary day. But the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk, everything changed. Two white police officers, Officer Brent and Officer Kane, stepped in front of her as if she had just robbed the store. No warning, no greeting. Just cold eyes and smug expressions. "Ma'am, we've received reports of credit card fraud. I'm going to need to see that receipt," Brent said. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like someone pretending to be polite while already judging the outcome. Nia paused, confused. She had just paid for her tablet with her government credit card. She handed them the receipt without hesitation and calmly produced her government-issued identification badge. She had nothing to hide. Kane took the ID, glanced at it for all of 2 seconds, then rolled his eyes. "Looks fake. She's probably a scammer," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Brent to hear but not for the people around them. Brent nodded slightly. "Turn around, ma'am. Hands behind your back." "What?" Nia blinked. "I suggest you verify that ID before you do anything else. You're making a serious mistake." But they didn't listen. They weren't interested in facts. Kane already had the cuffs out, and within seconds, Nia's wrists were pulled behind, her and locked in cold steel. A small crowd started to gather and phones were pulled out. Some passers-by started filming, whispering to one another. A few tried to intervene, asking the officers what was going on. "She used a stolen card," Brent announced loudly for everyone to hear. "We caught her red-handed." Nia said nothing. More. Her eyes didn't flinch. She stayed quiet even as they shoved her into the back of the patrol car. She had been trained for moments of pressure, but not even her FBI field training could have prepared her for the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in broad daylight, all because of the color of her skin. At the precinct, it only got worse. They didn't run her ID. They didn't check the receipt with the store. Instead, they processed her like any other suspect, fingerprints, mugshot, and a holding cell. They mocked her along the way. "You're gonna regret this," she said only once. Kane smirked. "Yeah, I'm sure. You're probably gonna tell us you're CIA next." Nia stared at him. "Call Director Michelle Torres, FBI, Internal Affairs." Brent laughed. "Nice try, Miss Jackson. That ID was a decent fake. You almost had us." They left her in the cell for 3 days. 3 days without being properly charged. 3 days where they let her sit in silence, confident they had done their job, convinced she was just another thief caught in the act. But the walls were already closing in on them. Back in D.C., Director Torres hadn't heard from Nia since her routine trip to Atlanta. When the check-ins stopped, Torres started digging. Within hours, she tracked the tablet purchase. The trail led her straight to the Atlanta Police Department. She didn't send an email. She didn't make a call. She got on a plane. The day of Nia's arraignment, the courtroom was buzzing with reporters and onlookers curious about this high-profile fraud suspect. Nia stood there in an orange jumpsuit, shackled with her hair pulled back, her eyes calm but piercing. She didn't look broken. She looked like someone waiting for justice to arrive. The judge flipped through her file, frowning. "Miss Jackson, are you claiming to be a federal agent?" the judge asked. Before Nia could answer, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. "She's not just an agent," a woman's voice rang out. "She's my boss." All heads turned. Director Michelle Torres entered, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. Her badge glinted under the courtroom lights, and her tone left no room for questions. She walked straight up to the judge and handed over a thick folder. Classified credentials. Special Agent Dr. Nia Jackson, FBI Internal Affairs. You've detained one of our top officers without due process. There was silence. Brent and Kane, who had smugly taken their seats near the prosecution, looked like ghosts. Judge Daniels read through the folder and then looked up, furious. Officers Brent and Kane approached the bench. Now. The officers hesitated. The judge didn't repeat herself. The courtroom shifted from a place of presumed guilt to a reckoning. Nia was unshackled, escorted to the defense table by the marshals. The judge's gavel slammed. All charges dropped. This court is in recess. But the story didn't end there. Outside reporters swarmed Director Torres. Nia stood beside her, now in a tailored black suit. Cameras flashed. Microphones crowded her face. "I wasn't arrested because I did something wrong," she said into the microphones. "I was arrested because two officers made assumptions about what a black woman in a nice dress with a government card must be doing. I had a badge. But what if I didn't?" Later, a full investigation was launched. Kane and Brent's records revealed years of misconduct, complaints swept under the rug, and a disturbing pattern of racial bias. This time, there was no shield to protect them. They were fired, then federally charged. The badge they once hid behind was stripped away. Weeks later, Nia stood at a podium addressing a new class of law students. "Some people think justice is blind," she said. "But it's not. It sees exactly who you are. The real question is, will it speak when it sees wrong?" I spoke. And so can you. The room erupted in applause. And just like that, what started as a quiet afternoon became a national conversation. One woman, one wrongful arrest, and one moment that shook the system. Inside the station, the air was thick with arrogance. Officer Brent leaned against a desk, twirling his sunglasses between his fingers, smirking like he had just won a game. Officer Kane stood nearby, rifling through Nia's belongings with little care. They had her ID, her receipt, and her FBI badge, sitting right in front of them on the desk, but neither of them looked closely. Neither of them bothered to verify it. They had already made up their minds. Brent turned to her with a mocking grin. "So what are you, CIA? Secret Service? Going to tell us you're James Bond next?" Nia sat quietly in the holding chair, her hands still cuffed behind her back, her expression calm but razor-sharp. She didn't rise to the bait. She didn't flinch. Her voice was composed and low. "I suggest you make one phone call," she said, looking Brent directly in the eye. "Ask for Director Michelle Torres at the Bureau. Tell her you've just arrested Special Agent Nia Jackson." Kane chuckled from the other side of the room. "Special Agent? Yeah, okay, and I'm the president." They burst into laughter. It echoed off the cold concrete walls. "Lady, you seriously need to work on your stories," Brent said. "You're not even good at lying. That ID's cheap plastic. Next time you want to pretend to be federal, at least use a real name." "Nia Jackson? That's the best you could come up with?" Still, Nia didn't argue. She knew what kind of men she was dealing with. She had investigated men like them before. She had interviewed victims who described this exact kind of smirking injustice, how their warnings were ignored, how their truths were buried beneath the weight of assumption. These officers weren't just negligent, they were dangerous. And they were about to find out who they'd messed with. But not yet. Instead of verifying her badge, they ignored it. Instead of calling the Bureau, they typed up a charge sheet. The supposed ongoing fraud investigation they cited didn't actually exist, at least not in the way they claimed. There had been a few reports in the area of fake credit cards, and they decided without evidence that Nia fit the description. She was buying high-end tech, Kane said as he filled out the form. "Looks suspicious. You don't just walk out of a store like that with a brand new tablet unless you're scamming someone." "Exactly," Brent nodded, barely glancing at the surveillance footage that showed Nia calmly paying, showing ID, and walking out of the store without incident. Facts didn't matter here. Assumptions did. Bias did. They fingerprinted her, took her mugshot, and locked her in a holding cell like a common criminal. She didn't protest. She didn't scream or cry. She sat on the edge of the metal bench staring at the wall, her mind not on her situation, but on the system. Because Nia Jackson was not just another agent, she was senior internal affairs within the FBI. Her role? To uncover systemic corruption inside police departments across the country. She had been part of major cases that led to national reform. She had trained agents on ethics, oversight, and accountability. She had led investigations that resulted in the convictions of crooked officers, planted evidence scandals, and major lawsuits. Ironically, she had just spent the last month reviewing a pattern of misconduct in Southern law enforcement agencies. Atlanta wasn't even her original stop. It was an overnight layover, a detour, one that just turned into her next case. While she sat in that cell, the station hummed with ignorance. Kane made jokes about her being a diva with a fake badge. Brent called her Agent Netflix and told the rookie officers to take notes on how to spot a low-level grifter. Not once did anyone scan her badge or search the federal database. Back in D.C., the Bureau started to notice her silence. Nia always checked in, always. She was scheduled to meet a field team the day after her layover. When she didn't show, Director Michelle Torres knew something was wrong. She called Nia's personal cell. No answer. She pinged her badge ID. Tracked it to a precinct in downtown Atlanta. Torres didn't ask questions. She got on a jet. Meanwhile, inside the holding cell, Nia was patient, calm. She knew this would take time. She'd seen enough to know how slow accountability moved, especially when it came to officers like Brent and Kane. But she also knew that when it did come, it came fast, loud, and with consequences. 3 days passed, no bail, no real charges filed, just pending investigation. The only visitors Nia had were 2 detectives who half-heartedly tried to get a confession out of her. She repeated the same thing each time. Call Director Torres. You're going to regret this. They laughed her off. And then, on the morning of her arraignment, the mood shifted. A junior clerk ran into the booking room out of breath. Guys, we've got a situation. Someone from D.C. just landed. FBI, high level. Brent and Kane exchanged a look. For the first time, they looked unsure, nervous even. Then the station phone rang. It wasn't a courtesy call. It was a warning. Director Torres was already in the courthouse. The judge had been briefed. A federal team had reviewed the arrest files, what little there were. The officers had not only failed to verify Nia's credentials, they had violated multiple civil rights procedures. And suddenly, the woman in the orange jumpsuit wasn't a suspect. She was a witness against them. Kane tried to laugh it off. She should have said something earlier. But Brent wasn't laughing. He looked pale, sweating. She did. We just didn't listen. In the courtroom, as Nia stood before the judge, the truth was already unfolding. And in the back of the room, Torres stood tall, arms folded, watching silently as the system began to turn on those who had twisted it. The fall was only just beginning. 3 days later, the courtroom buzzed with restless whispers. The media hadn't caught on yet, but murmurs of an unusual arrest had begun to circulate through legal circles. The defendant, a woman accused of credit card fraud, was rumored to be someone far more significant than the paperwork suggested. Nia Jackson stood at the defendant's table, clad in a baggy orange jumpsuit. Her wrists were shackled in front of her. Despite the discomfort, her back was straight, her eyes unwavering. She didn't look like someone caught in a scam. She looked like someone waiting for the truth to catch up. Judge Daniels flipped through the thin folder presented to her by the arresting officers. Her brow furrowed. "Miss Jackson," she said, peering over her glasses. "You're claiming to be a federal agent?" Nia opened her mouth to respond, but before a single word escaped, a voice echoed sharply from the back of the courtroom. "She's not just an agent, she's my boss." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, conversations halted mid-whisper. All eyes locked on the woman striding through the wooden double doors in a sharp navy suit. Her FBI badge clipped to her belt, flanked by 2 stern-faced U.S. Marshals. Director Michelle Torres didn't hesitate. She moved down the aisle like a storm given form, controlled, powerful, and absolutely certain of her authority. When she reached the front, she didn't glance at the stunned prosecutors or the confused officers. She addressed only the judge. "I'm Director Torres, head of FBI Internal Affairs," she said. "You've arrested one of our senior agents under false pretenses. This," she dropped a sealed file on the judge's bench, "should clear things up." Judge Daniels opened the file slowly, skimming the top pages. Her expression shifted, from skepticism to disbelief, then to cold anger. She closed the folder and looked up, her gaze fixed on Officers Brent and Kane. "Officers Brent and Kane," she said slowly. "Approach the bench. Now." The courtroom was dead silent. The two officers who had sauntered into the room earlier with puffed chests and smug looks suddenly seemed far smaller. Brent swallowed hard. Kane tried to glance around for some backup, but the room offered none. They walked stiffly toward the bench. "You're telling me," Judge Daniels said, her voice low and furious, "you arrested a federal agent without verifying her credentials, without probable cause, and without any legitimate evidence beyond your own assumptions?" "Your Honor," Brent began. "She had an ID, but we believed—" "You believed?" The judge interrupted sharply. "You believed what exactly? That a black woman buying electronics was inherently suspicious?" Brent stammered. Kane looked like he wanted to vanish. Judge Daniels continued, her tone biting. "Agent Jackson spent 3 days in custody. 3 days. With no formal charges, no bail, no verification. Do you understand the implications of what you've done?" Outside the courtroom, local news crews were beginning to set up. Rumors had reached the street. Inside, the judge had lost all patience. "You're both suspended from duty effective immediately," Judge Daniels snapped. "Internal Affairs will handle the rest. Bailiff, unshackle Agent Jackson. Right now." The officer beside Nia moved, quickly fumbling slightly with the cuffs. As the chains fell away from her wrists, Nia rubbed the red mark silently, then stood and walked over to stand beside Director Torres. The room watched as the power dynamic shifted instantly. Brent and Kane were escorted away, no longer the enforcers of justice but its target. Outside the courthouse, chaos was already unfolding. Cameras pointed at the doors. Reporters called out names. But Nia didn't stop to speak. She stepped into a waiting black SUV beside Director Torres, leaving the reporters shouting behind her. Back at FBI headquarters that evening, Nia stood, in front of a room full of agents. Her face was calm, but her voice was stronger than ever. "They didn't just arrest me," she said. "They profiled me, dismissed my ID, ignored every protocol because they saw what they wanted to see. This wasn't just negligence, it was a mirror reflecting everything wrong with parts of our system." The agents around her didn't interrupt. Some looked away, some clenched their jaws, others simply nodded, silently taking in the weight of what she was saying. "We don't just wear badges," she continued. "We're supposed to uphold a standard higher than our own comfort. And when officers abuse that trust, when they target people based on race, background, or bias, they don't just violate the law, they damage the entire foundation of justice." Torres stepped forward. "As of this moment, Officers Brent and Kane are under federal investigation, and they won't be the last. We're reopening past complaints. If this happened to one of our own, imagine how many others never stood a chance." The room stayed silent, and in that silence something shifted. This wasn't just a personal win for Nia. It was a message. Later that week, footage of the courtroom confrontation went viral. News outlets ran with headlines like "FBI agent wrongfully arrested by local cops" and "systemic bias exposed in shocking court reveal." But Nia stayed out of the spotlight. She went back to work quietly, her resolve sharper than ever. In the months that followed, policy reforms were proposed. Training programs were rewritten. Officers around the country were reminded, assumptions are not facts. Bias is not evidence. And no one, not even those wearing the uniform, is above accountability. Nia never told her niece about the 3 days she spent behind bars. Instead, she gave her the tablet she bought that day, the one that started it all, and simply said, "Use this to learn everything, to question everything, and to never ever stay silent when something feels wrong. Because sometimes, One voice is all it takes to shake a system wide awake. The courtroom had barely settled before the news cameras arrived in full force. As officers Brent and Kane were escorted out in silence, the press outside erupted into a frenzy. Microphones pointed, cameras rolled, and headlines were drafted on the fly. Within hours, national outlets had picked up the story. Undercover FBI agent arrested by white officers without cause. Systemic racism exposed in Georgia police. Department. FBI agent Nia Jackson breaks silence after wrongful arrest. But the headline that made the biggest waves came from a small independent journalist who had caught it all on livestream. She had a badge. They had a bias. By morning, Nia Jackson stood in front of a podium just outside the FBI's regional headquarters in Atlanta. No jumpsuit, no cuffs, just a sharp, fitted gray suit and a calm, commanding presence. The crowd was thick with reporters. Flashes from cameras stung the air with every blink. She didn't flinch. This wasn't just an arrest, she began. This was a humiliation tactic based on appearance, not evidence. It was about control, not justice. And while I walked away with my dignity and career intact, I need everyone listening to understand something. She paused. Every lens in the city pointed at her. This was never just about me. It's about the hundreds, thousands of individuals who've been through this exact situation without a badge, without a title, and without a platform to fight back. Her words cut through the silence like glass. She wasn't angry. She was precise. And the message was undeniable. Over the next several days, deeper investigations began. Internal Affairs had already been tracking complaints within the precinct, but now the full weight of federal scrutiny crashed down on it. And what they uncovered stunned even the skeptics. Officers Brent and Kane had a long trail behind them. Years of complaints, nearly all dismissed without action. Black and Latino residents had reported being stopped for vague suspicion. Multiple claims of excessive force. Dash cam footage conveniently lost. Body cams malfunctioning. In one case, a man's complaint about planted evidence had been buried until Nia's arrest reopened the file. One by one, old cases were exhumed, and a pattern emerged: racial bias, power abuse, and procedural violations. Some reports were detailed. Others were just scrawled notes from terrified citizens. But the theme was the same: intimidation masked as policing. And this time they couldn't hide behind paperwork or rank. When confronted with the new evidence, the department had no choice but to act. Brent and Kane were suspended without pay, pending investigation. But the pressure from the public and the weight of the FBI's involvement meant that wouldn't be enough. Within a week, they were arrested. The charges were staggering: abuse of power, civil rights violations, falsifying police records, suppression of exculpatory evidence, and, in Kane's case, possession of controlled substances allegedly used to plant evidence. It sent shockwaves across the country. Protests erupted outside courthouses, not just in Atlanta, but in other cities too. People weren't just angry about Nia's arrest. They were angry because her story validated years of pain. It confirmed what so many had tried to say and had been ignored for saying. If it could happen to her, an agent of the highest order, what chance did the average person have? During a televised town hall the following week, Nia sat alongside Director Torres and several civil rights attorneys. When asked how she remained calm, she responded, "Because I've seen worse. I've interviewed mothers whose sons didn't make it out of those encounters. I've listened to men cry not from pain, but from the betrayal of a system they thought would protect them. I was calm because I knew I wasn't just representing myself, I was representing them." The moderator asked what changes she hoped would come from the incident. "Real accountability," she said. "Not just suspensions, not just PR statements. I want legal reform, mandatory body cam audits, a federal registry for officers with repeated violations. And most importantly, I want community oversight with actual teeth. It's time the public stopped being afraid of the people who are paid to protect them." Her words didn't fade. Within a month, legislation was proposed in Georgia to make all stop and search records public. A federal task force was formed to investigate departments with unusually high civilian complaints. And most importantly, past victims of Brent and Kane were invited to refile their cases, with Nia Jackson herself overseeing the reviews. Not every case would see justice. Some files were too old, others too damaged, but the ones that could be pursued were. Brent and Kane's trial began 3 months later. Inside the courtroom, their once proud defense crumbled under the weight of video, testimony, and undeniable bias. Their body language shifted. No more cocky postures, no smug smiles, just men confronted with the truth. Nia didn't attend every day, but she testified once. She didn't recount her own arrest in detail. Instead, she spoke about the people who couldn't speak for themselves. She listed names, some from her files, others she had met after her story broke. She ended her testimony with a statement that left the room still. Justice doesn't begin when someone with a badge gets wronged. It begins when every voice, no matter how quiet or powerless, is heard and respected. We don't need more heroes in uniforms. We need more humans in them. When the verdict came in, it wasn't a surprise. Guilty on all major counts. But the real victory wasn't just their conviction. It was the shift that followed. Across precincts and courtrooms, a new message was being reinforced. Profiling is not policing. Assumption is not evidence. And no matter the uniform, is above the law. Nia returned to work quietly, declining most media offers. She didn't want fame. She wanted focus, and that's what she gave. To the work, to the people, and to the promise she made long ago, to make sure no one else had to wear chains just to prove they belonged. A month later, the echoes of Nia Jackson's story had reached beyond headlines and hashtags. It was no longer just a viral moment. It was a spark, quietly igniting real change. Across cities, universities, and community centers, conversations had shifted. People were no longer just asking, "How did this happen?" They were asking, "What can we do next?" On a bright Saturday morning in Atlanta, Nia stood inside the community law center where she had volunteered before joining the bureau. The room was filled with young black law students, some in their first semester, others already prepping for the bar exam. They sat upright in metal chairs, notebooks in hand, phones on silent. They weren't there just for a guest speaker. They were there for someone who had lived the fight they were preparing to enter. Nia stood at the front of the room, dressed in a fitted blazer, no podium, no notes. Just her and a small tablet in her hands, the same one she bought on the day that changed everything. She held it up. "This," she said, pausing, letting the room settle, "wasn't just a piece of tech. It was a trigger, literally and metaphorically. It started a chain of events I couldn't have predicted. One moment I was just a woman running errands. The next I was handcuffed, profiled, and stripped of my identity in front of dozens of people who didn't even know my name." The room was silent, locked on her every word. "But what they didn't know," she continued, "was that this wasn't the end of my story. It was a reminder of why I started it in the first place. Why we all start." She paced slowly, her voice clear, but full of emotion. "When I joined the FBI, I knew I wasn't just signing up to investigate crimes. I was walking into a system that doesn't always welcome people who look like me. I was entering rooms where my presence would raise eyebrows before I ever opened my mouth. But I made a promise to myself that no matter how difficult it got, I wouldn't change me, I'd change the system." Heads nodded. A few students whispered encouragement to one another. Nia could feel the energy shifting from passive interest to deep investment. She pointed at a young woman in the front row. "You, one day, might be asked to defend someone who's already been judged by the color of their skin. You," she turned to a young man in the back, "might be the only voice of reason in a courtroom determined to silence the truth." She held the tablet up again and said, "This isn't just a purchase, it's a symbol of how easy it is to be mistaken for something you're not, and how important it is to never let that mistake define you." The crowd clapped, not just politely, but with genuine emotion. Some students stood up, offering her a small ovation, but she wasn't done. Don't wait to be respected, she said, her voice firm now. Command it, be excellent, not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove yourself right. And most importantly, hold those in power accountable. Even if they wear a badge. Even if it costs you comfort. Because real justice doesn't whisper, it challenges. After she spoke, there was a moment of stillness. Then a student raised their hand. How did you stay calm when they arrested you? He asked. How did you not explode? Nia smiled faintly, remembering the moment, the cuffs, the cameras, the humiliation. Because rage burns fast. But discipline moves mountains, she replied. I knew my badge didn't define me. My actions did. And I wanted them to remember. Me not as someone who lost control, but as someone who never gave it away. That struck something deep. Students leaned in, as if afraid to miss even a syllable. Another hand went up. What do we do when it feels like the system will never change? You change it anyway, she said. You join it, reshape it, rewrite its rules. You don't wait for permission. You earn your place, and then you make space for others. After the talk, dozens of students lined up, not just to thank her, but to ask questions, to seek mentorship, to find ways to act. Several asked about the FBI's internship program. One student who had never considered federal law enforcement before said, if you're in it, maybe I can be too. That day, 39 students signed up for applications to FBI internships and legal clerkships. But more importantly, a room full of future attorneys walked out believing they had power, not just in the law, but in their voices, their presence, and their integrity. Nia stood near the door as students filed out, shaking hands, exchanging words of encouragement. One young woman hugged her tightly and whispered, We needed you. Thank you for not staying silent. As the last student left, Nia sat quietly at one of the folding chairs, the tablet still in her hand. She glanced down at it, this simple, ordinary object that had become a symbol of so much more. It had been purchased on an ordinary day. But, because of what followed, it now meant everything. Later that night, as she reviewed emails and messages from students, activists, and even retired judges, she realized something important. Her story had grown beyond her. It wasn't just about the injustice she faced. It was about how that injustice could become a turning point, not for revenge, but for responsibility, the kind that pushes people to do more than complain, to act, to learn, to lead, to demand better, not only from others, but from themselves. And, as Nia prepared for her next speaking engagement, this time at a National Criminal Justice Symposium, she smiled and whispered to herself, one story, one badge, one moment. That's all it took to start a movement, and the movement had only just begun. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more untold stories to light. Together we can spark change one story at a time.